The election of 1936 was an overwhelming success for FDR. 523 to 8 votes in the Electoral College, that's a landslide, right? So when he begins his second term, he's got a lot of momentum. But that momentum is actually going to get stopped because of the fact that he's battling the Supreme Court. You see, during the 1920s, the Republicans were in charge of the White House. Thus, they appointed a lot of conservative Supreme Court justices. By the time FDR is in office, there are 4 conservative justices. And FDR called them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You know, war, famine, pestilence, and death. These people had very conservative opinions, and thus they found a lot of things that FDR did unconstitutional. Now, in addition to these 4 conservatives, you had 3 liberals. They, of course, were even older than the conservatives because they date back from all the way to the progressive period, particularly under Woodrow Wilson. Louis Brandeis, remember him? He's still around. He's over 80. So you have 4 conservatives and 3 liberals, right? How many Supreme Court justices are there? 9, right? So you need 2 more. So you have these 2 swing votes. And so in order to get a conservative decision in Supreme Court, you had to get all 4 conservatives and 1 swing vote. However, to get a liberal decision out of the Supreme Court, you needed all 3 liberals and both swing votes. Thus, you can see that FDR is going to have a problem getting things done in the Supreme Court. In 1935, for example, it declared the National Industrial Recovery Act unconstitutional. The following year, in 1936, the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, was declared unconstitutional. FDR basically wanted to have a little battle with them. He wanted to deal with the Supreme Court, but he couldn't do it in a way of, say, firing a justice. He can't do that. The President of the United States can only appoint a justice, and he or she can, will serve for life, provided he or she acts in good behavior. Thus, FDR had to find a new way, and he's going to propose the Judiciary Reorganization Bill in 1937. What this did was allow the President of the United States to appoint an additional justice for every justice above the age of 70. And there's a limit to it. He can only appoint up to 6 additional justices to the Supreme Court. Now, I wonder where they got that number 6 from. Let me think about it. Oh, yeah. There were 6 Supreme Court justices above the age of 70 that hadn't retired. So I guess that's where they got the number from. Now, the Republicans and Democrats in Congress realized what was going on. FDR was threatening to upset the independence of the judiciary. Some people call this the court packing scheme. And that's exactly what it would have come down to, because the Supreme Court would have gone from 9 to 15 justices, with 10 of those justices as liberal justices. Now, you might think to yourself, what difference does it make? Doesn't the Supreme Court just interpret law and that's it? I'm happy for you if you believe that, but you'll have a wonderful future somewhere, just not here, unfortunately. Essentially what happens is that there's going to be concern by both Republicans and Democrats, and the bill never even leaves Congress. Now, have I ever talked about a legislative defeat in FDR's first term? Well, the quick answer is no. He did not lose a single legislative battle. Thus, he expended a lot of political capital and ran up against a brick wall and lost. That's going to deflate a lot of the momentum that FDR had. Now, I'm going to pose this, however. The Supreme Court, soon after this failure to pack the scheme, the Supreme Court suddenly started turning around its decisions. It started finding more liberal decisions rather than conservative decisions. Maybe FDR's purpose was actually served by the Judiciary Reorganization Bill because of the fact that he got the Supreme Court to actually rule in his favor. In his favor, right? Interesting. Food for thought. Anyway, by 1937, the New Deal is nearing completion, right? For example, we're starting to see an economic recovery in 1937. Things are looking good. The people are spending the money that they had received from the federal government, and when you spend money, things are flying off the shelves. Businesses have to buy more inventory, and those that are providing that inventory is going to have to provide more, which means jobs. So it's this upward spiral that's going up, and it's a good thing, right? Well, The FDR administration looks at it and goes, is this good news or is this runaway inflation? They thought it's runaway inflation. So they are going to do things that are actually going to harm the economy. Now, why are they going to do that? Well, probably because of the fact they hadn't seen any really good any good economic news to begin with, so they could not recognize what was going on. And another thing about this, they were uncomfortable with spending the money. They were uncomfortable with raising the debt. What does a government have to do to stop inflation? Well, the first thing you have to do, raise interest rates, and the next thing, cut spending, or at least slow it, right? So they cut spending in programs like the WPA. Well, the result, of course, is going to be that when they cut the spending and they raise interest rates, the economy went right back down into a recession. Now, you might ask yourself, wait a minute, we're in a depression and now we're going to have a recession? How can you have a recession within a depression? Well, that's for your economic majors to answer. Ask your economics professor. But nevertheless, that's what happens. Now, the Republicans are going to have a field day with this, right? How long have they been waiting for really bad economic news to bash against the head of the Democrats, right? They even call it the Roosevelt administration and played around with it and had a little fun. But nevertheless, it really is going to bring about the end of the New Deal. FDR is going to push for a couple of more things. For example, he pushes for a second Agricultural Adjustment Act. It's just like the first. It pays farmers to basically limit their production and reach market quotas, right? It makes agriculture still a subsidized industry. Another thing that he's going to pass is the Fair Labor Standards Act. This may have been as important as the Social Security Act. It established the idea of maximum working hours. A full-time job is one that a person works over 40 or more hours a week, right? And then, of course, you're going to have a federal minimum wage. The Fair Labor Standards Act actually sets a minimum wage of 35 cents an hour. Finally, the Fair Labor Standards Act is going to eliminate child labor. Finally, after 50 years behind the rest of the civilized world getting rid of child labor, the United States finally does it. And how does it do it? It basically tells a business that if you employ a child in the age of 14 or below, you cannot sell any of your products across state lines. After all, it's the federal government that regulates interstate commerce. These last two bills are going to be what traditionally the end of the New Deal. 1939 is traditionally the last year of it, mainly because of the fact of two reasons. Number one, World War II is starting, and thus FDR has to focus on those issues. A second reason is the fact that he's finding opposition not only from the Republicans, but from his own party. You see, the South was still overwhelmingly a Democratic Party stronghold, but these Democrats were a lot more conservative. And as time goes on, these Southern Democrats are going to start allying themselves with Northern Republicans as the government seems to be getting bigger and bigger and more liberal. Nevertheless, by 1938, 1939, the eve of the World War II, the New Deal is done. And now we have to count the costs. We have to figure out exactly how effective was it, both in the immediate and long term.